Hi, my name is Molly from Stitching Sassy, and today we're talking about getting started with your embroidery project. So there are a few supplies that you're going to need to gather before you get started with your embroidery project. So what you're going to need is some kind of fabric, an embroidery hoop, embroidery floss or thread, an embroidery needle, scissors, and if you are transferring a pattern, some sort of writing utensil. So let's talk about fabric. My personal favorite and my recommendation for what you should buy is linen or a linen blend fabric that comes from, the fabric section of a store like Joann Fabrics or Hobby Lobby or Michael's if you're in the US. This is the kind of fabric that comes on a bolt and you have to ask the attendant to cut off a specific yardage for you. The reason why linen is such a good choice for embroidery is because it comes in many different colors, it doesn't have a lot of stretch, and it's generally has, a fairly decent weight to it that's heavy enough to hold up to the tension of your embroidery stitches. So what you'll want to ask for when you're ordering a certain amount of the fabric is I generally ask for 10 inches of fabric. For me, 10 inches is a good size for my 7-inch embroidery hoops, which is a popular size. I use it frequently, and it's what most of my patterns are designed for. That'll give you 1.5 inches extra on each side of the hoop when you're going to place your hoop on the fabric. Not too much, not too little. So you're gonna end up with this long strip that's 10 inches by whatever the length of that bolt of fabric is. And you can just go ahead and cut that down into different 10-inch squares, and then you have a lot of fabric. Because if you go down the embroidery aisle, you might see that they also sell what could be referred to as embroidery linen there. They might have some different colors. They come rolled up in a little tube and they're hanging from the aisle. And those, in my opinion, are just extremely overpriced. They're no better than the fabric that comes on the bolt. They just cost a lot more. Another kind of fabric that you might run into on the embroidery aisle is called Aida or even weave. And that looks like this. It's really fabric that's made for cross stitching. If you look closely at it, you'll see that there is these little holes, this sort of grid pattern to it, which is really important for cross stitching because you are working from a grid and that's telling you where to put your needle. You can embroider on Aida, there's no issue with that, but in my opinion, it's not the best choice because when you feel limited with where you're going to put your needle, I think that it takes away a little bit from the organic and free-form sort of properties that embroidery has to offer, and that's what really, in my opinion, makes it really different from cross-stitching. And finally, Aida is just, again, far, far more expensive than the linen fabric. But what if you don't want to go spend money on fabric when you're not even sure if you're going to like this hobby or not? There's lots of choices at home that make great embroidery fabric. So what kind of fabric should you look for? Again, like with the linen, some of the qualities that you want to look for are fabric that is not too stretchy and also not too lightweight. A t-shirt is a poor choice for embroidery fabric, especially for a beginner. It just has too much stretch. You're not going to be able to keep the tension on the fabric when it's in your hoop. A far better choice would be something like a cut-up canvas tote bag or maybe cutting up a painting drop cloth. The next thing that we're going to talk about is embroidery hoops. And just like with the fabric, there's a lot of different choices. The main ones being between a wooden hoop and a plastic hoop. And they both have pros and cons. Neither is very expensive. You find them in the embroidery aisle of the craft store. Personally, I like to work in a plastic hoop. I find these to be far more grippy and hold my fabric a lot tighter and a lot better. And then when I'm completely done with the project, I'll go ahead and frame it in a wooden hoop. Next is embroidery floss. So this is where you get to pick your colors and have a lot of fun. Most craft stores sell DMC brand embroidery floss, and this is a really good one to look for. It's not expensive. It's often about 55 cents per skein that looks like this. And at least for my patterns, you will never need more than one skein per color. So this is a pretty affordable supply. DMC thread is, in my opinion, far better than, you know, the no-name multi-packs that have every color of the rainbow, because it has sort of a silky sheen to it that's apparent when you're done stitching that really gives your work this rich, reflective sort of quality. And finally, all of the colors are water fast, so that becomes really important when you are using water erasable pens to transfer. You don't want to have put hours into your project only to mist it with water and have the colors bleed everywhere over your hard work. Next, you'll need an embroidery needle. Not all that much different from a sewing needle, just that it has a larger eye, which makes it a lot easier to thread. Some people use a needle threader. I think that with the embroidery needles, usually it's easy enough to simply wet the thread between your lips and just go ahead and stick it through the eye. The last things that you'll need are scissors just to cut your fabric, to cut your thread, and then some sort of writing utensil if you're transferring a pattern. We'll talk more about transferring the pattern in another video. And that's it. Those are all of the supplies that you'll need to get started with your embroidery project. It's a really fun and inexpensive hobby, and I hope you have fun stitching.